The morning Eliza Edwards turned 18. She burned the breakfast porridge so badly that Mrs. Hartley smacked her across the face with a wooden spoon and told her she was too stupid to even deserve the roof over her head. Standing in the corner of the kitchen at the Hartley boarding house in Piach, Nevada, with her cheeks stinging and tears threatening to spill, Eliza reminded herself of what she had always known. She was unlovable, unwanted, and destined to spend her life alone. The year was 1875, and she had spent the last 14 years in this dusty mining town, being passed from one reluctant caretaker to another, each one making it clear that she was nothing but a burden. Her mother had died bringing her into the world, and her father, a silver miner, had perished in a cave collapse when Eliza was only 4 years old. She barely remembered him, just fragments of a weathered face and calloused hands that had once held hers. After his death, she became the responsibility of whoever would take her, and no one ever truly wanted to. The Henderson family kept her for 3 years before deciding they could not afford another mouth to feed. The Reverend and his wife took her in next, but Mrs. Porter made it abundantly clear that Eliza was a charitable obligation, not a child to be loved. When the Porters moved to California 2 years later, they left Eliza behind with the Hartleys. Mrs. Hartley was a severe woman who ran her boarding house with an iron fist and saw Eliza as free labor. For the past 7 years, Eliza had cleaned, cooked, scrubbed, and served the boarders without complaint, sleeping in a cramped room in the attic and eating whatever scraps were left after everyone else had finished. She had learned early on that expressing any need or desire would only result in punishment or mockery. "Get that mess cleaned up and start over," Mrs. Hartley snapped, her thin lips pressed into a hard line. "And if you waste any more oats, it will come out of your portion." Eliza nodded silently, swallowing the lump in her throat as she scraped the ruined porridge into the slop bucket. Her portion was already meager enough. Through the kitchen window, she could see the main street of Piach beginning to stir with morning activity. Miners trudging toward the shafts, merchants opening their shops, and cowboys riding through town on their way to ranches in the surrounding valleys. Sometimes she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to leave this place, to ride off into the vast Nevada landscape and start fresh somewhere no one knew her as the unwanted orphan. But those dreams always faded quickly. She had no money, no family, and no prospects. Mrs. Hartley had made it clear that when Eliza turned 18, she would need to start paying rent if she wanted to keep her attic room or find employment elsewhere. Since no one in Piach would hire her for anything but the most menial work, and even that was scarce, Eliza knew her options were severely limited. The boarding house door creaked open, and Eliza heard the heavy footsteps of the morning boarders coming down for breakfast. She quickly prepared fresh porridge, working with practiced efficiency to slice bread and set out preserves. As she carried the food to the dining room, she kept her eyes downcast, making herself as invisible as possible. Most of the boarders ignored her completely, which was preferable to the alternative. Mr. Dawson, a mining foreman with tobacco-stained teeth, had a habit of making crude comments that made her skin crawl. She had learned to move quickly past him and never be caught alone in his presence. "Coffee, girl," one of the miners barked without looking up from his plate. Eliza fetched the pot and poured carefully, her hands steady despite the turmoil inside her. She had perfected the art of appearing calm and empty as if nothing touched her. It was safer that way. After the boarders finished eating and departed, Eliza spent the rest of the morning scrubbing floors and washing linens. Her hands were raw and red from the harsh lye soap, and her back ached from bending over the washboard. When Mrs. Hartley finally released her for the afternoon with instructions to fetch supplies from the general store. Eliza grabbed her worn shawl and escaped into the dusty streets. Piotch was a rough town, born from the discovery of silver in the nearby hills. The population had swelled to several thousand, most of them miners, gamblers, and those looking to profit from the boom. Violence was common, with shootings happening regularly enough that the undertaker was one of the busiest men in town. But Eliza had learned to navigate the streets safely, keeping to herself and attracting no attention. The general store was crowded with customers, and Eliza waited patiently for her turn, clutching Mrs. Hartley's list and the small purse of coins she had been given. She was studying the jars of candy on a high shelf, a luxury she had never tasted, when someone bumped into her from behind. "Pardon me, miss." The voice was deep and courteous, touched with a slight drawl. Eliza turned to find herself looking up at a tall cowboy who was regarding her with genuine apology in his eyes. He was perhaps in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly beneath his worn hat. His clothes were dusty from travel, but his gray eyes were kind. "It is quite all right," Eliza said quietly, stepping aside to give him room. He tipped his hat to her, a gesture of respect that caught her off guard. Most men in Piotch treated women as either commodities or obstacles. This stranger seemed different, though she quickly reminded herself not to read too much into a simple courtesy. "You are not from around here," she observed before she could stop herself. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "No, madam, just passing through on my way to the Double K Ranch." "Been hired on as a hand." Eliza nodded, expecting him to move on, but he remained standing there, looking at her with an expression she could not quite decipher. "I am Xavier Kincaid," he said, extending his hand. She hesitated, unused to such formality, before carefully placing her hand in his. His grip was warm and gentle, his palm calloused from hard work. "Eliza Edwards," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Miss Edwards." Before she could respond, Mr. Patterson behind the counter called out that he was ready to help her. Eliza quickly withdrew her hand and turned to conduct her business, hyper-aware of Xavier Kincaid's presence as he browsed the store. She tried to focus on Mrs. Hartley's list, rattling off the items she needed, but her thoughts kept drifting to the cowboy with the kind eyes. When she had gathered everything and paid, she found Xavier waiting by the door. He reached out and took the heavy sack of flour from her arms before she could protest. "Allow me to help you carry this," he said. "Where are you headed?" "The boarding house, just down the street, but I can manage on my own," Eliza protested, though she was grateful for the assistance. The flour was heavy, and she still had to carry the other parcels. "I am certain you can, but my mother raised me to be helpful to ladies," Xavier replied with an easy smile. "Besides, I have nothing but time until I head out to the ranch tomorrow morning." Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks, an unfamiliar flutter in her chest. She was not used to being treated with such consideration, and it made her both pleased and wary. In her experience, kindness always came with a price. They walked together down the dusty street, Xavier matching his long stride to her shorter one. He asked her about Piotch, and she found herself answering his questions, describing the town and its rough character with more words than she typically spoke in a week. "And you live at the boarding house?" he asked, as they approached the weathered building. "Yes, I work there," Eliza said, her voice losing its warmth. She did not elaborate on her circumstances, unwilling to reveal her shameful status as an orphan who was barely tolerated. Xavier carried the flour sack up the steps and set it carefully inside the door when Eliza opened it. He tipped his hat to her again, that same genuine smile on his face. "Thank you for the conversation, Miss Edwards. I hope I might see you again before I leave town." "Perhaps," Eliza said noncommittally, though part of her hoped desperately that she would. She watched him walk away, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust, before Mrs. Hartley's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. "Stop your dallying and put those supplies away properly. And who was that man? I will not have you bringing shame to this house by consorting with strange cowboys." "He simply helped me carry the flour," Eliza said, forcing herself to remain calm. "Nothing more. See that it stays that way. You have no prospects and no dowry. No decent man would want you, so do not get any foolish ideas in your head." The words struck like physical blows, as they always did, confirming what Eliza already believed about herself. She was unworthy of love, destined to remain alone. Whatever brief warmth she had felt during her encounter with Xavier Kincaid quickly froze over, replaced by the familiar cold emptiness she carried inside. That evening, as she served dinner to the boarders, Eliza tried not to think about the cowboy with the kind eyes. But when she finally collapsed into her narrow bed in the attic, exhausted from the day's labor, her thoughts drifted back to him despite her best efforts. She fell asleep remembering the warmth of his hand and the genuine respect in his voice when he called her Miss Edwards. The next morning brought the usual routine of cooking, cleaning, and serving. Eliza expected Xavier Kincaid to have already left for the Double K Ranch, so she was startled when she saw him through the kitchen window, walking down the main street. She told herself it was none of her concern and returned to kneading bread dough, but when Mrs. Hartley sent her to fetch water from the pump, she found him waiting nearby. "Good morning, Miss Edwards," he said, removing his hat. "I was hoping I might run into you." "Good morning, Mr. Kincaid," she replied, her heart beating faster despite her attempts to remain composed. "I thought you were going to the ranch. I am heading out shortly, but I wanted to say goodbye first, and to ask if you might consider allowing me to write to you." Eliza's eyes widened in surprise. "Write to me? Why would you want to do that?" Xavier seemed genuinely puzzled by her question. "Because I found your company pleasant and I would like to continue our acquaintance. The Double K is only about 15 miles from Piotch, so I will be in town from time to time. But in between visits, letters would be nice." She stared at him, searching for the joke or the hidden cruelty, but found only sincerity in his expression. It made no sense to her why this man would want to correspond with her. She was nobody, nothing special, certainly not worth pursuing. "I do not understand," she said honestly. "You do not know anything about me." "Then help me get to know you," Xavier replied gently. "Unless you would prefer I not write, I do not wish to impose." Eliza knew she should refuse. Getting attached to this cowboy would only lead to heartache when he inevitably realized she was not worth his time. But something in his eyes made her want to believe, just for a moment, that maybe she could be wanted. "I suppose receiving letters would be acceptable," she said carefully. His face brightened with a smile that made her chest tighten. "Excellent. And you will write back?" "If I have time," she said, not wanting to seem too eager. "That is all I ask." He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and scribbled something on a page, tearing it out and handing it to her. "This is the address for the Double K Ranch. Even if you do not write, I will send you letters if that is all right." Eliza took the paper, her fingers trembling slightly. Yes, that would be all right. They stood there for a long moment, neither quite ready to end the conversation. Finally, Xavier put his hat back on and gave her a small bow. "Until we meet again, Miss Edwards, take care of yourself." "Safe travels, Mr. Kincaid." She watched him mount his horse and ride out of town, heading south toward the distant mountains. Only when he had completely disappeared from view did she allow herself to look at the paper in her hand, reading the carefully written address. She folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket, a small secret to guard. Mrs. Hartley was waiting when Eliza returned with the water, her expression suspicious. "What did that cowboy want with you?" "Nothing of consequence," Eliza lied, keeping her face neutral. "He was simply being polite. See that you remember your place, girl. Cowboys like that do not settle down with penniless orphans. He will use you and discard you, mark my words." The familiar shame washed over Eliza, but beneath it, a small spark of defiance flickered. Xavier Kincaid had treated her with more kindness in 2 brief encounters than anyone in Piotch had shown her in 14 years. Even if Mrs. Hartley was right and his interest faded, Eliza would cherish these moments of being seen as someone worthy of respect. 3 days later, a letter arrived for her. Mrs. Hartley handed it over with a disapproving scowl, but she could not prevent Eliza from receiving mail. Eliza waited until she was alone in her attic room before carefully opening the envelope, her hands shaking with anticipation. The letter was not long, but every word felt precious. Xavier wrote about his journey to the Double K, describing the landscape and the ranch itself. He asked about her life, her interests, her dreams. He wrote as if her answers actually mattered to him. Eliza read the letter 3 times before taking out her own precious supply of paper and ink. She had very little, saved from occasional gifts or things discarded by boarders, but she used it carefully to compose a response. Writing about herself felt strange and uncomfortable. She had spent so long making herself invisible that putting her thoughts and feelings into words seemed almost rebellious. But she did it anyway, telling him about her days at the boarding house in vague terms, mentioning the books she had managed to read when she could borrow them, and the way the Nevada sunset sometimes painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple. She tried to sound more interesting than she felt, worried that he would realize how ordinary and damaged she truly was. The correspondence continued over the following weeks. Xavier wrote regularly, his letters arriving every few days, filled with details about ranch life, stories about the other cowboys he worked with, and questions that showed he actually read and remembered what she told him. Eliza found herself opening up gradually, sharing more of herself than she had ever dared with anyone. She learned that Xavier was 24 years old, originally from Texas, and had been working as a cowboy since he was 16. His parents had both passed from fever when he was young, making him an orphan like her, though he had been old enough to make his own way in the world. He had drifted from ranch to ranch, never quite feeling settled until he came to Nevada. Eliza told him about losing her parents, though she kept the painful details of her life with the Hartleys vague. She did not want him to pity her, and she feared that if he knew the full extent of her circumstances, he would stop writing. But Xavier seemed to read between the lines, his letters becoming increasingly protective and concerned about her well-being. 2 months after their first meeting, Xavier rode into Piotch on his day off. Eliza was hanging laundry behind the boarding house when she heard his voice calling her name. She turned to find him dismounting from his horse, his face breaking into a wide smile when he saw her. "Miss Edwards, I hope you do not mind the surprise visit." Eliza set down her laundry basket, her heart racing. He looked even better than she remembered, his presence making the dreary boarding house yard seem suddenly brighter. "Of course not, Mr. Kincaid. It is good to see you. Please call me Xavier. We have been corresponding long enough to dispense with formalities, do you not think?" "Only if you call me Eliza." "Eliza," he said, as if testing how her name felt in his mouth. "Would you do me the honor of taking a walk with me? I know it is your work day, but perhaps you could spare an hour." Eliza glanced nervously at the boarding house. Mrs. Hartley would be furious if she shirked her duties, but the thought of spending time with Xavier was too tempting to resist. "I should not, but yes, I would like that very much." They walked together through Piatch, heading toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to scrubland and rocky hills. Xavier told her about a problem they had been having with coyotes at the ranch, and she listened with genuine interest, asking questions and offering observations. It felt natural and easy, more comfortable than she had ever been with another person. "I have been thinking," Xavier said as they reached a spot overlooking the valley, "about what you wrote in your last letter regarding your situation at the boarding house." Eliza tensed, regretting how much she had revealed. In a moment of weakness, she had told him about Mrs. Hartley's increasing demands and threats to turn her out if she could not pay higher rent. "I should not have burdened you with my troubles," she said quietly. "It is not a burden, Eliza. I care about what happens to you." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I know we have not known each other long, and this might seem forward, but I want you to know that I have grown very fond of you. These past months of writing to you have been the happiest I can remember." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. "I do not understand. Why would you care about someone like me?" "Someone like you?" Xavier turned to face her fully, his expression confused. "You mean someone intelligent, thoughtful, and kind. Someone who sees beauty in sunsets and finds joy in borrowed books. Eliza, you are remarkable, even if you cannot see it yourself." Tears sprang to her eyes, unwanted and overwhelming. "You do not know what you are saying. I am nothing, nobody, an orphan with no family, no money, no prospects. I have been told my entire life that I am unworthy of love, and it is true." Xavier reached out and gently took her hands in his. "Whoever told you that was wrong, dead wrong. You are worthy of everything good in this world, Eliza. You are worthy of respect, of kindness, of love." "I do not know how to believe that," she whispered, the tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Then let me help you learn." His thumbs brushed softly across her knuckles, the touch sending warmth through her entire body. "I am not going anywhere. I will write you every week, visit when I can, and show you through my actions that you are valued and cherished." Eliza wanted to believe him so desperately it physically hurt. But the years of rejection and cruelty had built thick walls around her heart, and she could not tear them down in a single moment. "What if you change your mind?" she asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if you realize I am not worth the effort?" "That will not happen," Xavier said with absolute certainty. "But I understand your doubt. I am not asking you to trust me completely right now. I am just asking for a chance to prove myself." She looked up into his gray eyes and saw nothing but honesty and warmth. Something inside her began to crack, a tiny fissure in the armor she had built around herself. "All right," she said softly. "A chance." His smile was radiant. "That is all I need." They walked back to the boarding house slowly, neither wanting the afternoon to end. Xavier told her about his plans for the future, how he was saving money to eventually buy his own small ranch. He spoke of it wistfully, painting pictures with his words of a simple life working the land, raising cattle, building something that belonged to him. "That sounds wonderful," Eliza said, allowing herself to imagine what such a life might be like. "It does it not? Though I have to admit lately when I picture it, you are there too." Eliza stopped walking, staring at him in shock. "Me?" "Yes, you." Xavier took both her hands again, his expression serious. "I know it is too soon to speak of such things properly, but I want you to know my intentions are honorable, Eliza. I am courting you if you will have me." And if things continue as I hope they will, I would like you to be part of that future I am building." Her mind reeled, unable to fully process what he was saying. Marriage, a future together. It seemed impossible, a dream too fragile to touch. "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "Say you will think about it. Say you will give us a chance to see where this might lead." "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I will." When they reached the boarding house, Xavier lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her knees weak. "I will write soon," he promised, "and I will visit again in 2 weeks if that is acceptable." "Very acceptable," Eliza managed to say, her voice barely working. She watched him ride away, then turned to face the boarding house, only to find Mrs. Hartley standing in the doorway, her face twisted with anger. "Get inside. Now." Eliza obeyed, following Mrs. Hartley into the kitchen where the older woman rounded on her with fury. "How dare you disappear during work hours to gallivant with that cowboy? Do you think you can just shirk your responsibilities whenever some man pays you attention?" "I am sorry, Mrs. Hartley. I should have asked permission first." "Permission? You think I would give you permission to waste time on foolishness?" "That man is filling your head with impossible dreams, Eliza. He will tire of you soon enough, and then where will you be? Ruined and alone, that is where." "Xavier is a gentleman," Eliza said, surprised by her own boldness in defending him. "He treats me with respect." Mrs. Hartley laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Respect? Men do not respect girls like you, Eliza. They use you and move on. You would be wise to remember that before you end up in a situation you cannot escape." The words were meant to hurt, and they did, but for the first time, Eliza did not fully believe them. Xavier had shown her something different, a glimpse of how she deserved to be treated, and she clung to that knowledge like a lifeline. "I have work to do," she said quietly, moving past Mrs. Hartley to resume her duties. Over the following months, Xavier kept his word. He wrote regularly, visited when he could, and treated Eliza with unwavering respect and affection. Slowly, cautiously, she began to let her guard down, allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of being loved. Their courtship was unconventional, conducted mostly through letters and brief visits, but it deepened nonetheless. Xavier learned about her love of reading and brought her books from the ranch owner's library. Eliza discovered his passion for horses and listened eagerly to his stories about training them. They talked about everything and nothing, building a foundation of friendship alongside their growing romantic feelings. Mrs. Hartley continued to disapprove, making snide comments and trying to discourage Eliza from seeing Xavier. But for the first time in her life, Eliza stood her ground, refusing to let the older woman poison this one good thing she had found. 6 months into their courtship, Xavier asked Eliza to accompany him on a proper outing. He arranged for a buggy and drove her out to a beautiful spot in the hills where wildflowers bloomed despite the harsh Nevada landscape. They shared a picnic lunch he had packed, and Eliza felt more content than she could ever remember being. "Eliza," Xavier said as they sat watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. You have brought joy and purpose to days that used to feel empty. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a tiny diamond. "I know I do not have much to offer yet. I am still saving for that ranch, and it will be a few more years before I can afford it. But I promise to work hard and provide for you as best I can. Eliza Edwards, will you marry me?" Eliza looked at the ring, then at Xavier's face, seeing nothing but love and hope in his expression. The old fears tried to surface, the voice in her head that said she was unworthy, but she pushed them aside. Xavier had shown her through his consistent actions that she was valuable, that she deserved happiness. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, I will marry you." Xavier's whoop of joy echoed across the hills as he pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Eliza wrapped her arms around him, letting herself feel safe and wanted for the first time in her life. "I love you," she whispered against his chest, the words still foreign on her tongue but growing more comfortable. "I love you so much. And I love you, Eliza. I will spend every day of my life making sure you never doubt that." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Piach. The ranch owner, Mr. Dawson, who had grown fond of Xavier, stood as witness along with his wife. Mrs. Hartley refused to attend, telling Eliza she was making a terrible mistake and would come crawling back within a year. Eliza did not care. As she stood beside Xavier, wearing a simple blue dress that Mrs. Dawson had helped her make and spoke her vows, she felt truly happy for the first time. When Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her softly, sealing their marriage, she knew she had finally found where she belonged. The ranch owner had given them permission to live in a small cabin on the Double K property, a modest 2-room structure that had previously been used for storage. It was not much, but Eliza and Xavier cleaned it thoroughly and made it their own. Eliza hung curtains she sewed herself, and Xavier built them a proper bed frame. They had few possessions, but they had each other, and that was enough. Married life brought new challenges and adjustments. Eliza had to learn to accept affection and kindness without suspicion, to believe that Xavier's love was genuine and lasting. There were moments when her old insecurities surfaced, when she waited for him to realize his mistake and leave her. But Xavier was patient and steady, reassuring her through his words and actions that he was committed to their marriage. For his part, Xavier learned about the depth of the wounds Eliza carried from her years of rejection and mistreatment. He saw how she flinched when voices were raised, how she hoarded food as if afraid it might be taken away, how she apologized excessively for the smallest perceived mistakes. It broke his heart to see the scars left by those who should have cared for her, and he made it his mission to help her heal. "You never have to apologize for existing, Eliza," he told her one evening when she had apologized for the 3rd time for a slightly overcooked dinner. "You are my wife, my partner, my equal. This is your home and you belong here. Nothing you could do would make me love you less." Gradually, with Xavier's consistent love and support, Eliza began to believe him. The walls around her heart continued to crumble, allowing her to accept and return affection more freely. She laughed more often, smiled more readily, and started to see herself through Xavier's eyes rather than through the cruel lens she had carried for so long. Working on the ranch suited Eliza. She tended a vegetable garden, learned to care for chickens, and even helped Xavier with the horses when needed. The physical work was demanding, but it was different from the drudgery at the boarding house. Here, she was building something for herself and her husband, creating a life that belonged to them. The other ranch hands and their families welcomed Eliza warmly, treating her as one of their own. For someone who had always been on the outside, being part of a community was a revelation. She formed friendships with the other wives, particularly Sarah Mitchell, whose husband worked alongside Xavier. Sarah was a few years older and had 2 young children, and she took Eliza under her wing, teaching her about running a household and offering companionship. "You seem different than when you first arrived," Sarah observed one afternoon as they worked together preserving vegetables. "Happier. I am happier," Eliza admitted. "Xavier has shown me that I am worth more than I believed. He is a good man, but you deserve credit too. Sarah said kindly. It takes courage to accept love when you have been taught you are unworthy of it. You are stronger than you realize. The words settled warm in Eliza's chest, another piece of healing clicking into place. As months turned into a year, then two, Eliza's transformation continued. She grew more confident, more certain of her place in the world and in Xavier's heart. Their love deepened, becoming a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and genuine affection. They talked about their dreams for the future, about the ranch Xavier still hoped to buy, about the family they wanted to build together. When Eliza realized she was pregnant, nearly 2 years into their marriage, she felt a complicated mix of joy and fear. She was thrilled at the prospect of having a child with Xavier, of creating a family built on love rather than obligation. But she also worried about whether she would know how to be a good mother, having never really experienced maternal love herself. Xavier was overjoyed at the news, his face lighting up with pure happiness when she told him. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating, as if testing the words. Then he pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "You are going to be an amazing mother, Eliza. Our child will be so loved." "How can you be so certain?" she asked, her old insecurities surfacing. "Because I know you. I know your heart, your capacity for love. You are going to give our child everything you never had and more, and I will be right beside you every step of the way." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Eliza experiencing relatively mild discomfort. Sarah and the other ranch wives rallied around her, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Xavier hovered protectively, insisting she rest more and take on fewer chores, though Eliza insisted she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she told him with amusement when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I know, but I want to take care of you," he replied, taking the basket anyway. "You do take care of me. Every day." In her 7th month, Eliza received an unexpected visit from Mrs. Hartley. The older woman appeared at the cabin door, looking uncomfortable and out of place at the ranch. Eliza invited her in hesitantly, unsure what had prompted this visit. "I heard you were expecting," Mrs. Hartley said, her eyes taking in the modest but clean and cheerful cabin. "I wanted to see for myself how you were managing." "I am managing well," Eliza replied carefully. "Xavier and I are very happy." Mrs. Hartley's expression shifted, something almost like regret crossing her features. "I can see that. You look healthy and content, more than I ever saw you at the boarding house." There was an awkward pause before Mrs. Hartley continued. "I came to apologize, Eliza. I treated you poorly for years, told you terrible things about yourself. I convinced myself I was teaching you not to have unrealistic expectations, but I see now that I was just cruel. You deserved better than what I gave you." Eliza stood in stunned silence. An apology was the last thing she had expected from this woman who had made her life so miserable. "I do not expect your forgiveness," Mrs. Hartley went on, "but I wanted you to know that I was wrong about you and wrong about your cowboy. He clearly loves you very much and you have built a good life here. I am sorry for trying to convince you otherwise." Eliza took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of hurt and resentment. She could hold onto that anger, let it poison her heart, or she could choose to let it go. Xavier had taught her that she deserved better than carrying such heavy burdens. "Thank you for your apology, Mrs. Hartley. I appreciate it. You are more gracious than I deserve." The older woman moved toward the door, then paused. "I hope your child brings you great joy, Eliza. And I hope you raise them knowing they are loved, something I failed to do for you." After Mrs. Hartley left, Eliza sat in her rocking chair, processing the unexpected encounter. When Xavier came home that evening, she told him about the visit, and he held her as she cried, releasing emotions she had kept bottled up for years. "I forgave her," Eliza said through her tears. "Not because she deserved it, but because I deserved to be free of the anger." "You are amazing," Xavier murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Every day you amaze me." Their son was born on a crisp October morning in 1878, entering the world with a lusty cry that filled the cabin. Eliza held him for the first time, overwhelmed with a love so fierce and immediate it took her breath away. This tiny person with his scrunched-up face and waving fists was hers and Xavier's, a living symbol of the love they shared. "What should we name him?" Xavier asked, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at his son. "William," Eliza said, thinking of Xavier's father. "William Xavier Kincaid. Perfect. He is absolutely perfect." They took turns holding William, marveling at his tiny fingers and the soft, dark hair on his head. Eliza felt a completeness she had never known existed, a sense that all the pain and loneliness of her past had led her to this moment, to this family. Motherhood came naturally to Eliza, perhaps because she was so determined to give William everything she had never received. She showered him with affection, spoke to him constantly, and made sure he knew every day that he was loved and wanted. Xavier was a devoted father, helping with nighttime feedings and diaper changes, playing with William whenever he had free time. "I never want him to doubt that he is loved," Eliza told Xavier one night as they watched their sleeping son. "I never want him to feel the way I did." "He will not," Xavier assured her. "We will make sure of that." When William was 6 months old, Xavier came home one evening with exciting news. He had saved enough money, and the ranch owner knew of a property for sale, a small spread about 10 miles from the Double K. It was not large, just enough for a modest cattle operation, but it was theirs if they wanted it. "It has a house, barn, and about 200 acres of decent grazing land," Xavier explained, his excitement palpable. "We could make a good life there, Eliza. Build something that belongs to us that we can pass down to William someday." "Yes," Eliza said without hesitation. "Let us do it." The transition to their own ranch was both exhilarating and terrifying. They named it the Kincaid Ranch and threw themselves into making it successful. Xavier worked from sunup to sundown, tending cattle, mending fences, and handling the countless tasks required to run a ranch. Eliza managed the house, the garden, the chickens, and their growing son, while also helping Xavier whenever she could. Money was tight those first few years, and there were times when Eliza worried they had taken on too much. But Xavier never wavered in his determination, and his faith gave her strength. They worked as a team, supporting each other through challenges and celebrating small victories together. Their hard work paid off. The ranch prospered modestly but steadily, and they were able to gradually improve their property and purchase more cattle. William grew into a bright, happy child who loved following his father around the ranch and helping his mother in the garden. When William was 3, Eliza discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, with more discomfort and fatigue, but she was thrilled at the prospect of giving William a sibling. Xavier worried about her constantly, insisting she rest more, and William tried to help by bringing her wildflowers and sitting quietly beside her. Their daughter, Emma Rose, was born in the spring of 1882. She had Eliza's delicate features and Xavier's gray eyes, and both her parents fell instantly in love. William was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help care for her and showing surprising gentleness for a young child. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch continued to prosper, allowing them to hire occasional help during busy seasons. Xavier's reputation as an honest, hard-working rancher grew, and he earned the respect of their neighbors and the community. Eliza found contentment in her roles as wife and mother, but also began to explore her own interests, particularly her love of reading. She started a small lending library in their home, sharing books with neighboring families, and eventually teaching several of the ranch children to read. It gave her a sense of purpose beyond her domestic duties, and Xavier encouraged her enthusiastically. "You have so much to offer, Eliza," he told her. "I love seeing you share your gifts with others." The children from nearby ranches would gather at the Kincaid place twice a week, and Eliza would teach them reading and basic arithmetic. She never charged for her services, remembering how precious education had been to her when she was young and how difficult it had been to access. Several parents tried to pay her, but she refused, finding joy in the work itself. As William and Emma grew, Eliza made certain they knew they were loved unconditionally. She told them every day, showed them through her actions, and created a home filled with warmth and security. The contrast to her own childhood was stark, and she felt deep satisfaction knowing she had broken the cycle of rejection and neglect. Xavier continued to be a devoted husband and father, his love for Eliza deepening with each passing year. He still looked at her with the same admiration and affection he had shown during their courtship, and he never missed an opportunity to tell her how much she meant to him. "You remember when we first met?" Xavier asked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the Nevada sky in brilliant colors. William and Emma were inside, supposedly getting ready for bed but more likely playing. "Of course," Eliza replied, leaning against his shoulder. "At the general store in Piotch. You were so kind to me. I knew the moment I saw you that you were special. There was something in your eyes, a strength and beauty that called to me. I thought you were mad to pay attention to me," Eliza admitted. "I could not understand why you wanted to write to me, why you would waste your time on an orphan with nothing to offer." Xavier turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You have never been nothing, Eliza. You were everything I did not know I was looking for. You still are." She kissed him softly, grateful beyond words for this man who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself, who had patiently and persistently shown her that she was lovable and deserving of happiness. "I love you," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I will never give up on you," Xavier promised. "Not in this lifetime." When William was 10 and Emma 7, Xavier and Eliza welcomed another daughter, Grace Margaret. By this time, the ranch was well established and profitable, and they had expanded their land holdings and built a larger house. Life was good, filled with the everyday joys and challenges of raising a family and running a successful ranch. Eliza sometimes thought about her younger self, the frightened girl who believed she was unworthy of love. That girl seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by a confident woman who knew her value, who was cherished by her husband and adored by her children. The transformation still amazed her sometimes. She occasionally saw people from Piotch when they went to town for supplies. Mrs. Hartley had passed away a few years earlier, and Eliza had attended the funeral, paying her respects to a woman who had ultimately given her an unintended gift by making her appreciate her current life even more. The boarding house had changed hands several times, and Eliza barely recognized the town that had once been her whole world. It seemed smaller now, less significant. Her real life had begun when she met Xavier, when she took that first terrifying leap of faith in believing she deserved happiness. As their children grew into young adults, Eliza and Xavier faced new challenges and joys. William showed an aptitude for ranching and a genuine love for the work, and it became clear he would eventually take over the Kincaid ranch. Emma was bright and curious, with a talent for drawing and a desire to see more of the world beyond Nevada. Grace was still young, her personality and interests still forming, but she showed signs of being as strong-willed as her mother. Xavier's hair started showing gray at the temples, and Eliza found laugh lines appearing around her eyes, but they aged together contentedly, their love maturing like fine wine. They still held hands when they walked, still stole kisses when the children were not watching, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. "We have built a good life, have we not?" Xavier said one evening as they sat together after supper, the children occupied with their own activities. "We have built a wonderful life," Eliza agreed. "Sometimes I still cannot quite believe it is real. Believe it, my love. You have earned every bit of happiness you have." Eliza thought about that word, earned. For so long, she had believed happiness was something she could never deserve, that love was a gift bestowed only on those who were somehow inherently worthy. Xavier had taught her that love was not something to be earned through perfection or achievement, but something freely given between people who chose to cherish each other. She had not needed to become someone different to deserve love. She had always been worthy, even when she could not see it herself. Xavier had simply helped her recognize the truth that had been there all along. Years continued to pass in a pleasant blur of seasons and celebrations, challenges overcome and milestones reached. William married a neighboring rancher's daughter, a sweet girl named Catherine who fit perfectly into the Kincaid family. They built a house on the ranch property and began their own family, making Eliza and Xavier grandparents to a sturdy boy they named Jacob. Emma pursued her artistic interests, eventually moving to San Francisco where she found work as an illustrator. Though Eliza missed her daughter terribly, she supported Emma's dreams, not wanting her to feel trapped or limited. Emma visited regularly and wrote frequently, her letters full of enthusiasm for her new life. Grace showed an interest in teaching and began helping her mother with the reading lessons for local children. She had Eliza's gentle patience and love of learning, combined with Xavier's steady confidence. Eliza saw so much of herself in Grace, but without the wounds and insecurities that had marked her own youth. It gave her deep satisfaction to know her daughter would never struggle with feelings of unworthiness the way she had. As Eliza approached her 50th birthday, she looked back on her life with gratitude and wonder. The frightened, lonely girl who had burned the porridge on her 18th birthday seemed like someone from another lifetime. That girl could never have imagined the rich, full life she would eventually build. Xavier had been the catalyst for her transformation, but Eliza understood now that she had done the hard work herself. She had chosen to take risks, to believe in the possibility of love, to heal from her wounds rather than let them define her forever. Xavier had opened the door, but she had walked through it. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised her with a gift. It was a leather-bound journal, the pages blank and waiting. "I thought you might want to write your story," he explained, "so our grandchildren and great-grandchildren can know about the incredible woman who built this family." Eliza held the journal, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "I do not know if my story is worth recording." "Your story is worth everything," Xavier said firmly. "You overcame so much, Eliza. You took the pain of your past and transformed it into something beautiful. That is worth remembering." She began writing that very evening, filling the pages with memories of her difficult childhood, her first meeting with Xavier, their courtship and marriage, the building of their ranch and family. It was cathartic to put it all into words, to trace the journey from the broken girl she had been to the whole woman she had become. Writing her story helped Eliza process emotions she had never fully examined. She wept as she wrote about her parents, mourning the father she barely remembered and the mother she had never known. She felt anger as she recorded the cruelties of her childhood, allowing herself to fully acknowledge the injustice of how she had been treated. But she also felt joy as she described falling in love with Xavier, the wonder of holding her babies for the first time, the satisfaction of building a life that mattered. The difficult parts of her story made the happy parts even sweeter, showing her how far she had traveled. When she finished the journal months later, she gave it to Xavier to read. He sat up late into the night reading her words, and when he came to bed, his eyes were wet with tears. "I am so proud of you," he said, pulling her close. "So proud of the woman you are, of everything you have overcome and achieved." "I could not have done it without you," Eliza replied. "We did it together," Xavier corrected gently. "We built this life together, Eliza, your strength and my love combined." As they lay together in the darkness, Eliza reflected on how much her understanding of love had changed over the years. She had once thought love meant being perfect, earning affection through flawless behavior and constant striving. She had believed that any mistake or flaw would result in rejection and abandonment. But Xavier had taught her a different kind of love, one that accepted imperfections and celebrated growth. He had loved her through her doubts and fears, her difficult days and her mistakes. And she had learned to love herself the same way, with compassion and patience rather than harsh judgment. Their later years together were peaceful and fulfilling. The ranch continued to thrive under William's capable management, with Xavier serving as an advisor rather than doing the heavy physical labor himself. Eliza continued teaching, now working with several grandchildren and great-nieces and nephews. They took pleasure in simple things: morning coffee shared on the porch, evening walks through their land, time spent with children and grandchildren who filled their home with laughter and noise. The love between them had evolved from the passionate romance of their early years into something deeper and more sustaining, a partnership that had weathered all storms and emerged stronger. On their 35th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was filled with people, noise, and love, so different from the lonely silences of Eliza's childhood. She looked around at this family she and Xavier had created, at the legacy of love they would leave behind, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. William stood to make a toast, raising his glass. "To my parents, who taught me through their example what real love looks like. You showed me that family is not just about blood, but about choice and commitment and showing up for each other every single day. Thank you for giving us all such a strong foundation to build our own lives on." Everyone raised their glasses, echoing the sentiment. Xavier reached for Eliza's hand, squeezing it gently, and she squeezed back, her heart full to bursting. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and quiet had returned to the house, Eliza and Xavier sat together on their porch as they had done countless times over the years. The Nevada stars blazed overhead, vast and beautiful. "Do you remember the first time we sat together and watched the sunset?" Xavier asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "When you proposed," Eliza replied. "I remember every detail. I remember being terrified and hopeful at the same time, wanting so badly to believe you meant what you said." "I meant every word. I still do. I know. It took me a long time to truly understand that, but I know it now in my bones. You love me, and I am worthy of that love." Xavier turned to look at her, his face tender in the moonlight. "It is one of my greatest accomplishments, helping you see your own worth. But you did the real work, Eliza. You chose to heal, to grow, to believe. That took tremendous courage." "We did it together," she said, echoing his words from years earlier. "Everything we have built, we built together." They sat in comfortable silence, Two people who had walked through life side by side for over 3 decades, who had raised children and built a ranch and created something lasting. The journey had not always been easy, but it had been worth every struggle. Eliza thought about the orphaned girl she had been, growing up believing she was fundamentally unlovable. She wished she could go back and tell that girl what the future held. That one day, a kind cowboy would see her value and help her see it too. That she would build a life filled with love and purpose. That she would mother children who never doubted they were cherished. That she would grow old beside a man who treasured her. But perhaps it was better this way. Perhaps the long journey from believing she was worthless to knowing she was precious had taught her lessons she could not have learned any other way. Perhaps the pain of her early years had given her the empathy and strength to become the woman she was now. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, attuned as always to her moods. "Just how grateful I am. For you, for our family, for this life. I never imagined I could be this happy." "You deserve every bit of it, my love. Every single bit." As they sat together under the stars, Eliza felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She had spent the first 18 years of her life believing a lie about her own unworthiness. But she had spent the decades since proving that lie wrong, building a life that demonstrated her value in countless ways. She was a beloved wife, a devoted mother, a cherished grandmother. She was a teacher who had helped dozens of children learn to read. She was a partner who had helped build a successful ranch from almost nothing. She was a woman who had taken her painful past and transformed it into wisdom and compassion. Most importantly, she was a person who had learned to love herself, to see her own worth not through the cruel judgments of those who had failed her in childhood, but through the patient, consistent love of a man who had recognized her value from the very beginning. Xavier had not rescued her, exactly. He had simply offered his hand and walked beside her while she rescued herself. He had held up a mirror that reflected the truth of her worth until she could see it for herself. He had loved her faithfully and well, proving through his actions that she was deserving of such love. And she had done the same for him, offering her own steady love and support through the years. Their marriage had been a partnership of equals, each giving and receiving in turn, each making the other stronger and better. As they finally rose to head inside for the night, Xavier wrapped his arm around Eliza's waist, and she leaned into his embrace. They walked together into their home, the house they had filled with love and laughter, past photographs of children and grandchildren, past mementos of a life well lived. In their bedroom as they prepared for sleep, Xavier pulled Eliza close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I love you, Eliza Kincaid. I have loved you since the moment I saw you in that general store, and I will love you until my last breath. And I love you, Xavier. Thank you for teaching me that I was worthy of love. Thank you for proving me wrong about myself." "It was my pleasure and my privilege," he murmured. "Now and always." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms as they had done for 35 years, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The years continued to unfold gently. More grandchildren arrived, each one welcomed with joy. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most respected operations in the region. Eliza's teaching continued until age made it difficult, but by then, Grace had taken over, carrying on her mother's legacy of sharing education freely. Emma returned from San Francisco to settle closer to home, her artistic career well established, but her heart drawn back to family. She brought with her a kind husband and 2 children, expanding the family circle even further. As Eliza moved into her 60s, her health remained good, though she moved more slowly and tired more easily. Xavier's joints ached on cold mornings, and his hair had gone completely silver, but his love for Eliza remained as strong as ever. They adjusted to the changes age brought, grateful for each day they had together. On a warm summer evening when Eliza was 63, she and Xavier sat on their porch as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. Their great-grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter floating on the evening breeze. William and Catherine were visiting along with Emma and her family. "We have been blessed," Xavier said, watching the children play. "Abundantly blessed," Eliza agreed. "Sometimes I think about how different my life could have been if you had not stopped to help me carry that flour sack so many years ago. I think about that too. What if I had just walked past? What if you had refused to let me write to you? We could have missed this entirely." But we did not miss it. We found each other and we built all of this together. Xavier reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me, Eliza. Loving you has been the great adventure of my life. And loving you taught me who I really was. You showed me that the cruel voices from my childhood were wrong, that I was always worthy of love and happiness. That gift is beyond price." They sat together as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. 3 generations of the family they had built surrounded them, a living testimony to the power of love and commitment. Eliza thought about the scared girl who had burned the porridge on her 18th birthday, who had believed herself fundamentally flawed and unlovable. She wished she could tell that girl that everything would be all right, that love was coming, that the pain would not last forever. But that girl was gone, transformed through years of being loved and learning to love herself. In her place was a woman who knew her own worth, who had built a legacy that would outlast her, who had turned the wounds of her past into wisdom and compassion. As darkness fully descended and Xavier stood to help her inside, Eliza took one last look at the land they had claimed together, the house they had filled with love, the family they had created. This was her life, hard-won and deeply cherished, a life she had once believed was impossible for someone like her. But Xavier had proven her wrong in the best possible way. He had shown her that love was not something to be earned but something to be shared, that she had always been worthy even when she could not see it, that her past did not define her future. Together they had built something lasting and beautiful, a testament to the transformative power of love. And as they walked hand in hand into their home, surrounded by the family that was their greatest achievement, Eliza knew that her story, which had begun in loneliness and pain, had found its perfect, happy ending. The cowboy who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself had given her the courage to become who she was always meant to be. And she had spent the rest of her life proving, through the love she gave and received, that she had always been deserving of happiness. Their love story became family legend, passed down through generations. Great-grandchildren who never knew them would hear about the orphaned girl and the kind cowboy, about how their love had founded a family and a ranch that endured. The journal Eliza had written became a treasured family heirloom, her words offering guidance and inspiration long after she was gone. But in the years they had together, Eliza and Xavier simply lived their lives, loving each other and their family, working their land, and finding joy in simple moments. They grew old together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing season, proving every day that the frightened girl had been wrong about herself all along. She had always been lovable. She had always been worthy. She had always been enough. Xavier had simply helped her see the truth, and together they had built a life that honored that truth in every possible way. And when their time on earth eventually ended, they left behind a legacy of love that would echo through generations, a reminder that everyone deserves to be loved, and that the right person at the right time can help us see our own worth when we cannot see it ourselves.